This week I'm joined by Graham Auld. Welcome to STEM with Mr. N, Graham.
Hi, Stuart. Nice to be here.
Graham has an HND in electrical and electronic engineering, and for the past 40 years has been working in the technology industry, and currently is a technical director of Entirely Online. Graham, can you tell everybody a wee bit about what your current role involves?
We started Entirely Online only 4 years ago as a kind of continuation of what we're doing already, because we realized that that's just how things were now. Everything was entirely online, and we wanted to be able to provide our clients with all of the tools they're required in order to be able to do their jobs, but be entirely location independent. And that turned out to be a good thing, because when COVID came along, that's exactly what everybody wanted to do. So centralized computing resources and technical resources, and the ability to get to all of that and communicate with one another electronically, or using that good old-fashioned thing called the phone, which we now also do over the internet using IP telephony, and stuff like this, stuff like Zoom, which has always been there. I think I had my first Skype call about 30 years ago, but Zoom's come forward enormously during the pandemic period. So Entirely Online is exactly that. It's an organization that assists businesses to make sure you can get to your stuff from wherever you happen to be.
So is a typical day for you, like working from home or remotely from an office, helping fix errors in systems, or what does it involve you generally day to day?
We run, there's half a dozen of us in the company, 4 of which are help desk engineers. And those boys and girls spend their day taking phone calls. You talk about 40 years, it's quite funny. And during that time, I can't print is the most common call we've had in all of the 40 years. And that's 40 years ago and last week. The level of the calls are the same. The proportion of the total is the same. Tell me things are improving. But our people will take control legitimately and with the user's permission of endpoints on people's desks, whether it's desktop computers, laptops, handheld devices, whatever it happens to be, and be able to see what they're seeing and help them, hold their hand and help them through whatever trauma they're having at that particular moment, whether it's something much more complex and we've got network issues and systems are turning pear-shaped. We handle all of that. In addition to that, we do my role is to oversee that help desk function, but also to oversee what our clients are doing and become their IT manager. We like to be, I say IT, but we just think about it really as T. If I have clients who are doing anything technological, anything at all, I don't care what it is, I'd really like to be involved in it and help them, guide them towards a sensible outcome and a realistic and cost-effective outcome, and really focus on not focus on the technology at all. The technology is just choosing the tool you need right at the end. Focus on the business process that they're trying to carry out. For example, if you want to put a door up, it's really best to have screws and a screwdriver. You know, a paintbrush and paint isn't going to cut it. So you really need the right tools for the job. So look at what the customer is trying to do, figure out the best way to do that with the tools that are available, and design and implement. Take it right through from the looking at the problem and writing it down on a pad, right through to implementation and installation and commissioning of the systems. And then once that's done, supporting it afterwards. That's it. That's all.
It sounds like a sort of very detailed and hands-on sort of role from your end and assisting clients. And quite funny that the complaints or the issues haven't really changed.
Haven't changed at all. Not one bit.
That time.
No.
Can you recall where your interest in STEM came from, although it may not have been referred to as STEM?
Well, it wasn't referred to STEM then. Really, it was aeroplanes. Really, I think the first thing, aeroplanes and radios. I was always, when I was a kid, there was a TV show on called The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and it was these two US Secret Service agents. And they had this most fantastic thing. They had a device like this, and they just pressed a button on it, and a little aerial popped out, and they talked into it, and they could speak to one another. Yeah, this was 50 years ago. This was an extraordinary thing, and I thought, how did they do that? Of course, they didn't. It was a prop. It was, you know, it was wooden. But we can do that now, and that's nice. It's nice to see a desire reach fruition like that. So radio always. My mum and dad always got on so well together that my dad used to take me out in the afternoon so he didn't pester my mother. So he used to take me down at the end of the airport runway. And back in the day, the airport, Glasgow Airport wasn't the airport. Glasgow Airport used to be a Royal Naval Air Force base. And back in the late 60s, there was an airport at Renfrew where Tesco's now is. That was where the airport terminal is. My dad used to take me down there when I was a wee boy. And there wasn't any security or any of that back in the day, so you could drive down almost to the aircraft. And he had a pal who was an avionics engineer there. He used to let little Graham, who was 4 or 5 years old, go up the steps onto the airplanes and sit in the pilot's chair and press all the buttons. It was great, loved it. So that's really my first recollection of anything kind of remotely technical. When my mum did eventually buy me a little transistor radio, because that's the way we used to get our music in those days, she was very upset because it had probably cost her a week's wages. And the first thing I did with it was take it apart to see how it worked. I'd never did figure how it worked, but I was left with a lot of pieces. So wasn't so popular then, but I've always been like that.
And that was where you really then got your interest of being hands-on and wanting to be involved in engineering.
And maybe should have been less hands-on than I was, but yeah, definitely get in among it.
And did you carry that on? Because you'd said that was when you were quite a young child. Did you carry that on into your future schooling, that you wanted to be involved in hands-on subjects and things?
Yes, yeah, very, very much so. Always liked all the technical subjects, which we used to call technical education back then. But the woodwork or metalwork, as it was then, I loved it, absolutely loved it, because you made stuff and it was great. You would start with a block of metal and come out with a thing that you could actually use. It was wonderful.
What then led from that interest in being hands-on with the radio to doing the metalwork and the technical education in school? What led from there into your current career path, working within the technology industry?
A series of absolute accidents. Just a chain of life events, really. Having left school, I did the thing that Mummy wanted me to do, and not go and do an apprenticeship and actually do something useful. She wanted me to go to university. So I was a good boy. I didn't rebel until I was about 25. But I was a good boy and did what Mummy said, kept the arguments down at home, and went to university to do an electronics electrical engineering course at Glasgow University. I have to say it didn't suit me. It suited a hell of a lot of people. It suited an awful lot of my chums there, a lot of whom are still good friends. But it didn't suit me because it wasn't hands-on enough. It was too theoretical. So I bailed out of that, actually, pulled the ripcord and bailed out, ejection seat, out of university in third year. Shocking, very, very bad behavior, a terrible disappointment to my parents and to myself, because they'd spent a lot of money, trying to, raise money for my education. I was just, throwing it all in the bucket as they saw it. So that's where the conflict point started. But that turned out okay, because I actually got a job as a coder for a company called Ferranti over in Bells Hill. And that linked in with the aviation interest, because we were doing electronics for airplanes, namely the Jaguar strike reconnaissance aircraft, which was new back then. It's been retired a while now, but it was new back then. And we were doing, in the most basic terms, in terms of computing, really the most basic hardware, the first kind of stuff that was available. We were doing the head-up displays, the navigation systems, the weapons aiming system. And because the Jaguar was a low-level strike and reconnaissance aircraft, we did this thing called terrain following radar, which was what it sounded like. Aeroplane flew along at 50 feet at 600 knots. And even the best pilot can't really keep their head around that. So we had forward-looking radar, and we were looking for hills. And when we saw hills coming, we pulled the stick back up, and we flew over the hills and then back down the other side. We did lose a few aircraft because the pilots thought they could do this better than the very basic, most fundamental computer, and quickly learned that they couldn't. But terrain following radar was great fun. That was the most interesting bit of it. So really that got me into computing. I wasn't really that enamored with software. It wasn't really software. It was more like, I don't know if any of your folks have ever come across programmable calculators. It was more like that, where you're writing the most basic machine code routines to get things to do stuff while staying within the amount of memory budget you had, which was tiny. Ferranti then wanted to get me involved a bit more in the hardware side of things, and quickly figured out that after 3 years of pontificating at Glasgow University, I wasn't really very good at anything terribly much with my hands. So Bell Technical College in Hamilton were very gracious and agreed to accept my 3 years at university and my hires and all my nonsense as being the equivalent of having done an apprenticeship and what was called an ONC in those days. I don't know what it's called now, Stuart. Having done a basic apprenticeship and qualified pretty much at 17 or 18, they were prepared to accept that, prepared to accept what I had done at university as the equivalent of that. I very quickly learned it was not the equivalent of that. The boys and girls who come out of the ONC and apprenticeships were greatly more skilled than I. And not just a little bit, you know, we're talking orders of magnitude more greatly skilled than I was in terms of physical dexterity and actually being able to do stuff. I could, like I can now, I could spout about things for hours. Actually doing it, however, I was rubbish at it. And that opportunity to do a full-time in technical college, higher national, was fantastic, because it was that thing where they would teach you about it using, you know, a chalkboard and showing you stuff. But then you actually went and did it and built it and made it and created it, constructed it and tested it, and became very frustrated with it and eventually got it right. And that was, for me, that was perfect. That was great. And that kind of got me on the computing bandwagon.
It's interesting there that you haven't had what some people would view as a sort of conventional path into technology, because there's so many like university courses now about computer science, and I think a lot of people would expect you maybe need to go down that route to be involved in the technology industry these days. But obviously you're a case in point that you don't have to. There are other routes. So being in the industry for that length of time, how has it changed from when you first joined to get interested in computing till now? Have you noticed any sort of major changes?
In terms of scale and magnitude, availability, cost, huge changes. In terms of basic functionality, not really terribly much. Things have got much cheaper, much more powerful, vastly, you know, 10 to the goodness knows what times faster and more capable and less expensive. But, you know, if you need to do some word processing, you just need a good bit of word processing software that needs to be able to work as fast as you do. And yeah, in 1981, we had that. Back in the day, the word processor, single-threaded, single-task processors. The device on your desk was doing word processing and waiting for me if it was waiting. And that worked real well. And we're kind of missing that now. The only place you see really focused, crafted coding like that is the kind of stuff SpaceX are doing now, where you don't have time to mess about. You know, you just have to get the job done. And what Elon Musk is and his like, although I don't really think there's terribly much like him, what Elon Musk is doing with the likes of SpaceX and what he's done with Tesla and what he's done with the Boring Company and all, and PayPal, for instance, and got him his first money. That, to me, that is identifying a problem that technology can fix and getting on with it. And that kind of really focused thing where you're taking a thing, and let's just not be modest. Let's just call it the Starship, and plank it in Boca Chica, Texas, set fire to it, send it 30 kilometers into the sky, turn the engines off, and guide it back to land itself, hopefully without blowing up, which the last one achieved.
Yep.
But the great thing about that company is the previous ones. What did we get to? Somebody can put their hand up and tell me. That we got to Starship. What was it? Was it 12? Before, I can't remember. Before we got one that did that, all the previous ones blew up. Did Elon care? No, he did not. He used it as an opportunity to identify what had gone wrong. It's just that bit of learning, trying it, getting it wrong, getting frustrated, fixing it and trying it again. That's what they're doing. And I think that kind of approach is fantastic. It's where I would want to be. What would I like to do next? I'd like to go and work for them. That's just be great. If you're watching, Elon, I'm available.
Well, hopefully he is watching. If I can get Elon Musk to watch this channel, that would be quite a coup for me as well. So would it be fair then to paraphrase that into saying that the computing technology that we had when you first entered the industry was more direct? There was a problem that needed fixing, and the technology was used to fix it. Whereas now we have all that knowledge, but everything's been made so interconnected that the actual problems, rather than being a direct coding fix, are now weaved into so many other bits.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of points of failure, which is why the 4 guys I have who earn their salaries being on the help desk continue to be actively employed all day, every day.
What advice would you give to the young people that are watching this interview that are interested in STEM but aren't sure of a route to carry it on as a career? What sort of advice would you give to those people?
Follow the route I did, which is don't know what's happening tomorrow, just get on with today. And if there's something that takes your interest, the thing you will be best at in your whole life is the thing you're interested in. I set a record at university. I shouldn't be telling this to people you're trying to educate, but I set a record at Glasgow University in that particular year, which we'll quote as 1979. I had the top mark in the whole year for thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. What is that? That's about fluids going over things like wings of aeroplanes going through the air. Oh, was I interested in that? Yes, I was. I got the top mark in the year. I also got the bottom mark in the year for, I'm sorry to say, mechanical engineering, which wasn't motor mechanics or how we think of our machines. It was about building bridges and stresses on beams, which, I've just about summed up my entire interest in that. Now, that's not a criticism of that. There are people who get very, very fired up about that. There are people who do not get fired up about airplanes. What I'm saying is follow the thing that is setting fire to you. If there's something that is going, oh, I really want to find out about that, don't let anybody tell you, oh, well, that's not the way to go. Because it's the thing you're going to be best at. And whether that's, putting satellites in space or making pancakes, I really don't care. You can be the best at whatever you do, but the key ingredient is your enthusiasm and your interest. So
you were also saying there as well that for the advances, so there was great advice there for young people, but for advances, you need to keep up the energy. And you are clearly still energized by your industry. It's evident when you talk about it. How have you managed to maintain that energy level over the span of your career?
You've been talking to me this morning. I just been some other old guy sitting in a chair having a cup of coffee. But even just engaging in this conversation, it's just the spark plugs start to go. The one good thing that you can do, in addition to being incredibly enthusiastic yourself about your chosen subject or whatever it is, not even subject, just maybe even a little bit of a subject, something that captures your imagination, is get involved with other people in a similar position and fire ideas off of one another.